My family stole $4,000 from my dead husband's life insurance, but when I discovered my sister never sent money to my parents, I exposed the scam at Christmas and left them speechless in front of everyone. I'm 34 years old. I work in marketing, and I've been a widow for 2 years. My husband, Jason, died in a construction accident when our son Owen was 5, and what happened after that with my family basically showed me who they really were. I guess I should start from the beginning, because to understand why I ended up yelling at my parents in the middle of a Christmas party in front of the entire family, you need to know how we got there. Jason and I met in college. We got married at 25, and we had Owen 2 years later. It was a good marriage. You know, nothing spectacular but solid. We were happy. Jason worked in construction. I was in marketing for a medium-sized company, and Owen was that kind of curious kid who would take apart toys to see how they worked inside. Life was normal, predictable, boring in the good way, and then Jason had the accident. I'm not going to go into details because I still have a hard time talking about it, but basically there was a problem with scaffolding. At work, he fell from a 3rd floor and died instantly. Owen was 5.5, and suddenly, I was a single mother trying to explain to my son why Daddy wasn't ever coming home again. The first few months were a complete blur. Jason's parents, Barbara and James, were incredible. Like they came to stay with us the first few weeks, helped with Owen, cooked, cleaned, basically kept me functioning when I could barely get out of bed. My own parents came to the funeral, of course, and my sister Michelle too, but after that they kind of disappeared. They'd call occasionally, but they never offered real help. You know what I mean? It was more like they were going through the motions of family protocol but without actually getting involved. The thing is, Jason had pretty good life insurance through his work. $300,000. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to secure Owen's future, if I manage it well. The construction company also gave us additional compensation, because the accident was due to their negligence, but that went through lawyers and took months. The life insurance came about 3 months after Jason's death, and believe me, I desperately needed it because between the funeral, debts, and trying to maintain the house on a single income, I was drowning financially. 2 weeks after the insurance check arrived, my mom called and said she wanted to make me a special dinner. She said something like they'd been really busy but wanted to be more present for Owen and me, that we were family and they should support us more. I thought it was weird because my parents aren't exactly the type of people who make spontaneous emotional gestures, but I thought, well, maybe Jason's death made them reflect how naive I was. I went to dinner on a Friday night. Owen stayed with Barbara and James because they said they wanted to have an adult conversation with me, which in retrospect should have been a giant red flag. My sister Michelle was there too with her husband Mark. Michelle is 3 years older than me, has 3 kids, and has always been my parents' favorite. Always. Since we were little girls, she could do whatever she wanted and my parents adored her, while I don't know, was like the backup daughter. Michelle married young, had kids fast, and decided to stay home selling those multi-level marketing products, essential oils, supplements, all that. Mark works in finance and they make good money, but Michelle is always asking for money for her business schemes. Dinner started normal. My mom made lasagna. We chatted for a while about trivial things, and then my dad said, "Well, Natalie, we wanted to talk to you about your financial situation." And I said, "My financial situation?" And he said, "Yes. We know Jason had life insurance, and you probably received quite a bit of money." Just like that. Straight up. No beating around the bush. I was like frozen because, what? Are we really having this conversation? My mom jumped in and said, "Don't get defensive, honey. We just want to make sure you're making smart decisions with that money, that you don't waste it." I told them I had $300,000 from the insurance because honestly, I didn't know I should lie about it. I didn't think it was a family secret or anything. Michelle literally leaned forward in her chair and said, "Wow, that's a lot of money." And then, I swear, the next thing she said was, "It's almost like someone's prayers were answered." I looked at her like, "What did you just say?" And she laughed nervously and said, "Oh no, I didn't mean it like that. I'm just saying at least something good came out of the tragedy." Something good. My husband's death. I should have left right then, but I was in shock. My dad continued saying they'd been thinking about how we could support each other as a family, that Michelle and Mark were going through some financial problems. First I'd heard of it. And by Mark's face, him too. and it would be good if I market. Could help out a little. I said, help how? And my mom said, well, you could send them some money monthly, not much, maybe $1,000, just until they stabilize. $1,000 monthly. For my sister, who'd always had everything while I worked 3 jobs to pay for college. I tried to say no, I really tried. But then they started with the classic manipulation. My mom said, I thought family helped each other, especially in difficult times. Michelle started crying, saying her kids needed things. That Mark didn't make enough. Mark looked increasingly confused. That she was trying to grow her business but needed capital. My dad said, Jason would have wanted you to take care of your family. They used my dead husband to manipulate me. I was so tired, so emotionally drained, that in the end I said yes. I said I'd send Michelle $1,000 monthly for 6 months. Then Michelle said, this is what we're going to do. I'm also going to put in money. I'm going to send $500 monthly to mom and dad to help with their expenses, and you send $1,000 to me. That way we're all contributing to the family. It seemed reasonable at the time, like, oh yeah, we're all helping each other. Mark looked at her kind of weird when she said that, but didn't say anything. I agreed because I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to go home to Owen and forget that entire uncomfortable dinner. I started sending $1,000 monthly to Michelle. First month, second month, third month. She'd text me constantly, like, thanks, little sis. You're really saving us. The kids appreciate it. But each message made me feel weird. Like something wasn't right, but I couldn't identify what exactly. And Michelle kept asking for more things. She'd call me saying, hey, could you help me pay for the kids' summer camp? It's only $2,000 more. Or, my car needs urgent repairs. Could you lend me $500? It was never enough. In the 4th month, I was visiting Barbara and James with Owen, and James casually mentioned something about how Michelle had bought a new car. I said, a new car? Michelle? And he said, yes. Your mom mentioned it to us last week. Apparently it's a really nice SUV. I was like, wait, Michelle told me she could barely pay her bills? And she bought a new car? Something didn't add up at all. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking about everything. I decided to call my mom the next day and casually ask her how Michelle was doing with her monthly contributions to them. You know, those $500 she was supposedly sending. There was an awkward silence on the other end of the line, and my mom said, what $500 are you talking about? I said, the $500 monthly that Michelle said she'd send you, the same way I send her $1,000. My mom laughed, a nervous and fake laugh, and said, oh, honey, Michelle never mentioned anything about that. It must have been a misunderstanding. In that moment, everything clicked. Michelle had never planned to send money to our parents. That entire conversation at dinner had been a coordinated performance to make me feel guilty. So I'd send money while she pretended she was also contributing. My own parents had been in on the plan. They'd used me. They'd used Jason's death and my grief to get money from me. $4,000 up to that point, and who knows how much more if I hadn't discovered the truth. I stopped sending money immediately. Michelle called me 3 days later screaming, saying we had an agreement, that her kids depended on that help. How could I be so selfish? I told her I knew she never sent money to our parents, that it had all been a lie. She was quiet for a moment and then said, well, my needs were more urgent. I was going to start sending money next month. Lie after lie. I hung up on her. The next few months were relatively quiet. I didn't talk much with my parents or Michelle, just occasional text messages, brief calls. Honestly, I was relieved to have space from them. Owen was doing well. Therapy was helping both of us process Jason's death, and I was starting to feel like maybe we could be okay, just the 2 of us with Barbara and James's support. Then November came and my mom called to talk about Christmas. She asked if we were coming to her house for the Christmas Eve party like always. I said yes, that Owen was excited to see his cousins. She said, oh, well, about that. This year we're doing the party adults only. I said, adults only? On Christmas Eve? When literally half the point of Christmas is the kids? She said yes, that they wanted a more sophisticated and calm celebration this year, that maybe I could leave Owen with Barbara and James. Something about the way she said it made me suspicious. I asked her directly, are Michelle's kids going to be there? She hesitated and said, well, yes, but only because Michelle doesn't have anyone to leave them with. I said, So the party is adults only, except for Michelle's kids, but Owen can't go. She started making excuses, saying Owen would probably be happier with his paternal grandparents anyway, that there wasn't enough space, that the house was going to be very crowded. All lies. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. I spent that entire week thinking about what to do. The sad and pathetic part of me still wanted to believe that maybe there was a reasonable explanation, that maybe my mom really thought Owen would be better off with Barbara and James. But the rational part of me knew exactly what was happening. They were excluding Owen. My 7-year-old son, who had lost his father 2 years ago, who was going through his third Christmas without daddy, was being excluded from the family party while all his cousins would be there. I decided to go anyway, but without telling my mom anything about Owen. Christmas Eve morning, I told Owen he was going to spend the day with his grandparents, Barbara and James doing science, experiments which excited him more than any family party. Honestly, that kid loves science, and I left for my parents' house. I arrived around 5 in the afternoon. I knocked on the door and my mom opened it with a huge smile, saying, "Oh, Natalie, so glad you came. Come in, come in." I walked in, and the first thing I saw was Michelle's 3 kids running through the living room with Santa hats. There were also my uncles, my aunts, several cousins, all with their children. Kids everywhere. But the party was adults only, right? I just stood in the entrance staring at everything. My mom noticed my expression and said, "Oh, well, you know how it is. In the end, everyone brought their kids." I asked her, "Everyone brought their kids, or everyone was invited to bring their kids except me?" She started stuttering, saying, "Well, Natalie, it's just that I thought Owen would be better somewhere else. And besides, you've been so distant lately." Right then, Michelle came out of the kitchen with a glass of wine and said, "Oh, you made it. I thought you were going to cancel." I looked at her and something inside me just exploded. 2 years of pain, of struggling alone, of keeping my son functioning while I could barely function, of being manipulated by my own family. It all came to the surface. I said out loud, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear me, "I want to ask everyone here a question. Did anyone else receive an invitation to an adults-only Christmas party, or was it just me?" The room went silent. My Aunt Carol said, "Adults only? No. We were told it was a normal family party." I said, "Exactly, because it was a normal family party for everyone except my 7-year-old son, who lost his father and apparently isn't good enough to be here." My dad jumped in saying, "Natalie, you're making a scene. We can talk about this in private." I said, "No. We're going to talk about this here, in front of everyone, because I want everyone to know what kind of people you are." I told the entire family how they'd manipulated me into sending money to Michelle after Jason died, how Michelle never sent money to my parents like she said she would, how they'd used my grief and my situation to get $4,000 from me. Michelle screamed, saying, "That's a lie. I needed that money. My kids needed that money." And I said, "Yeah, Michelle. You needed that money so much you bought yourself a new car." Mark, who was standing next to her, said, "What new car?" Michelle went pale. I continued, "And now you exclude me from Christmas. No, sorry. You exclude my son from Christmas because apparently I didn't send enough money, or because I stopped sending money, or because you just don't care." My mom tried to defend herself, saying they'd always treated both daughters equally, that I was being dramatic. And then Michelle, in a desperate attempt to change the subject, yelled, "At least I was contributing to the family. At least I was sending $500 monthly to Mom and Dad." We all froze. Mark said, "What, $500? You never sent money to your parents. Where did $500 monthly come from?" Michelle realized what she'd just done. She'd just admitted in front of her husband that she'd lied to me about sending money to our parents, and worse still, she'd just implied she'd taken money from their joint account without Mark knowing. Mark looked at her like, "We need to talk now," and she started babbling, trying to explain. My Aunt Carol, who's always been very direct, said, Wait. Are you telling me you manipulated Natalie into sending money to Michelle after her husband died, excluded her son from Christmas, and all this while you," she pointed at my parents, "are perfectly fine financially?" My dad said, "You don't know the whole story, Carol." She responded, "I think I know enough of the story." Other family members started talking among themselves, some looking at me with pity, others looking at my parents with disgust. My cousin David said, "This is really messed up. Where's Owen now?" I told him he was with his other grandparents because he wasn't welcome here. David said, "Well, that's bullshit." And he stood up. His wife and his 2 kids stood up with him, and he said, "If Owen isn't welcome, then we're not staying either." One by one, several family members started leaving. Not all of them. Some stayed loyal to my parents, but enough left to make it very clear that what they'd done was wrong. My Aunt Carol hugged me before leaving and told me, "Your son will always be welcome in my home, any day, any time." I cried on her shoulder, like, finally, someone got it. Michelle was crying in the kitchen. Mark was furious with her. My parents were trying to control the damage, but it was too late. I left without saying anything else. I drove back to Barbara and James's house, walked in, and there was Owen with James, both wearing lab coats that Barbara had made them, mixing baking soda with vinegar in the kitchen sink, laughing as foam spilled everywhere. Owen saw me and said, "Mom, look, we're making volcanoes. Did you know that baking soda and vinegar create a chemical reaction that produces carbon dioxide?" He looked so happy, so completely oblivious to all the drama. And in that moment, I knew I'd made the right decision. This kid didn't need to be at that party with those people. He needed to be exactly where he was, with people who loved him unconditionally. Barbara made me hot chocolate. I sat with them, while Owen continued his experiments, and I told them everything that had happened. James said, "Those people don't deserve to be in Owen's life," and Barbara agreed. We spent the rest of the night watching Christmas movies. Owen fell asleep on the couch between us, and it was the most peaceful Christmas we'd had in 2 years. The following days were chaotic. Michelle sent me like 20 text messages, alternating between apologies and attacks, saying I'd ruined her marriage. That Mark was considering divorce. Spoiler. They didn't divorce, but they had to go to couples therapy. That it was all my fault. I blocked her. I blocked my parents too. I blocked anyone who tried to defend them or tell me I should forgive them because they were family. But several members of my extended family contacted me with support. My Aunt Carol invited me to her house for Christmas Day. Owen played with his cousins. It was beautiful. My cousin David and I started seeing each other more often. He has kids Owen's age, and now they have regular playdates. And turns out I had more family than I thought. They just weren't my parents or my sister. It's been about 6 months since that happened. I still don't talk to my parents or Michelle. I don't miss them. Honestly. Owen is fine. Better than fine, actually. He's in 2nd grade, still obsessed with science, and Barbara and James take him to museums and science fairs every month. I redirected the money I was sending to Michelle to a college fund for Owen, and I also started therapy for myself, which I should have done a long time ago. My therapist says what happened was financial and emotional abuse, that my parents have probably always favored Michelle, and that Jason's death just made everything more visible. She's right. I guess. Looking back, I can see the pattern. All the times they chose Michelle over me. All the times they minimized my achievements while celebrating every little thing she did. I just had never seen it so clearly until they excluded my son from Christmas. Last week, Owen asked me if we were going to see Grandma and Grandpa soon. I told him the truth, that sometimes people aren't good for us, even though they're family, and that it's okay to put distance from people who hurt us. He looked at me with those big, serious eyes he gets when he's processing something important and said, "Like when we decided not to go to the park near the house anymore because there are too many aggressive dogs?" And I said, "Exactly like that." He nodded and said, "Makes sense. Anyway, I prefer grandparents Barbara and James. They do better science experiments. And that's where we are now. Quiet life, chosen family instead of biological family, Owen happy and thriving, and me finally learning to set boundaries and not let myself be manipulated. It's not the fairy tale ending some people expect to hear, like, "Oh, I forgave my family and now everything's perfect," but it's real and it's ours and it's enough.